Welcome to Detective Tales, where mysteries unfold and every detail matters. Inspired by the timeless works of Agatha Christie, this channel brings you classic-style detective stories filled with suspense, hidden motives, and unexpected revelations. Here, you'll walk alongside brilliant minds like Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, unraveling puzzles where nothing is quite as it seems. Prepare yourself for intrigue, atmosphere, and a journey into the golden age of detective fiction. The case begins now. The Tide at Greywick House. I noticed it first by the way he paused over the third envelope, holding it to the light, as if the paper might confess more than the ink ever would. Hercule Poirot has a ritual that would make a cathedral verger proud. He stacks the letters by thickness, considers the postmarks as though they are little passports, pairs each flap with his paper knife in a single immaculate stroke, sips his chocolate, and says nothing until he is ready to say everything. That morning he said only this: "Hastings, my friend, there is a voice in this paper." He handed it to me without flourish. The handwriting was small, firm, and obstinately old-fashioned, the kind that would have preferred sealing wax and a crest. It came from Greywick House, on a tidal island off the south coast, and it was signed by one Lady Severine Vale. The date, however, was a problem, written many weeks prior. "Why now?" I asked. "Why so late?" he corrected me, almost tenderly. "The sea is slow, Hastings, but the tide is punctual. A letter delayed is a mind in distress." I skimmed the lines aloud. Lady Severine hinted at unease, at whispers and little movements seen in mirrors, at the subtle theft of tranquillity. She spoke not of burglars or of blackmail, but of something smaller and more poisonous. Shifts of tone at dinner, looks exchanged, doors that should have been shut but were slightly ajar, a warded cabinet key gone from its hook and returned to its hook, and no one owning the action. There was a request couched in the politeness of another century. Would Monsieur Poirot, she underlined the monsieur as if to get the accent right, advise her discreetly and without the scandal of uniform? "She asks for counsel," Poirot murmured, "not for a policeman." "Shall we write?" I ventured. He looked at the date again, then at the window, where the London morning wore its film of soot like a veil. "None, we shall go." "On a hunch?" "On a courtesy," he said, "and perhaps also on a duty. Greywick is a polite island. It denies entry to nobody, but it prefers to choose the hour. One must cross the causeway at low tide. If one dallies, the sea makes a temporary orphan of the land, and your motor-car waits on one side, while your nerves wait on the other. The village is a pocket one inn, one church, one shop that sells postcards of storms and jars of toffee. Greywick House itself sits up the hill behind a fringe of black pines, as if it has cultivated its own secrecy the way others train roses. We did not get as far as the door before we were informed, first by the look of the blinds, and then by a discreet brass plate hung with black ribbon, that Lady Severine had died. "Heart," said Mrs. Pym, the housekeeper, in a voice that had boiled everything down to duty. "A quiet passing. The doctor said it was a mercy." Poirot bowed his head. "When?" "Some days ago, sir." He touched the envelope in his pocket, and I knew what he was counting. "And her letter?" Mrs. Pym blushed, as if caught out in a childhood fib. "Found it under the music cabinet back leg, sir. The post went out late because of the tide. Mr. Carlo, the carrier, promised to send it on at once. I did not know where else to turn, what with the family here and all." "Zamtenor? And they are here?" "At the Ida," she said, meaning the little hotel near the quay. "They wait for the solicitor." Waiting is not a neutral act. It either calms or it curdles. At the Ida it had curdled. We were announced as guests from London, and allowed to shelter in a lounge whose wallpaper had made its compromise with damp many seasons back. There we met the circle, drawn tight by circumstance and by tide. Miss Lynette Marsh, the companion, sat with her back to the window, very straight, very careful, her hands folded like good linen. There is a type of simple modesty that grows complicated under money. Hers had not yet had the chance. Mr. Adrian Vale, the nephew, was a pleasant scapegrace, his charm having the gleam of something frequently polished and frequently pawned. Miss Teresa Vale, the niece, was modern in the way a cigarette case is modern, sleek, silver, and always to hand. Her eyes took the room's temperature in a glance and found it lacking. Mrs. Beatrice Darnell, the elder niece, wore the softness of motherhood like a shawl, and her husband, Dr. Luca Darnell, a foreigner, cheerful and correct, carried his good humour the way some men wear their well-cut coats. Also present were the Misses Foxlow, two sisters who had read too many little books about other worlds, and had brought a planchette with them for comfort, as others travel with sandwiches. "I must ask you to forgive us," Miss Marsh said, standing. "This is not a house of rejoicing. No house is when a lady such as Lady Severine has gone," said Poirot gravely. "But there is also this," she wrote to me. "I am here because she wished it." That declaration moved something under the carpet of their reserve. A look passed between Adrian and Teresa. Beatrice's head lifted. The doctor's smile, which had been set to hospitality, faltered to reserve. The Foxlow sisters clasped each other, as if a prophecy had suddenly become an appointment. "You should speak with Dr. Gray," said Beatrice gently. "He attended my aunt." "And we must not forget the matter of arrangements," said Teresa, with a little emphasis on the plural, as if reminding everyone present that money arranges many things. Poirot made a small gesture, the international sign for patience. "One does not disturb the sea by thrashing one's arms," he said. "We will proceed with order." Dr. Hamish Gray received us at the surgery, where the smell of carbolic had been put aside for a more island perfume, wet wool, and pipe smoke. He was a man who had learned restraint from weather and from patience. Both can get on a high horse. The heart. "Yes," he said simply, after hearing Poirot's request. She had long fatigue, palpitations, the little breathlessness that climbs the stairs ahead of you and then blocks the way. Nothing dramatic? The end came late at night, without the cruelty of pain. "And yet she wrote to me," said Poirot softly. "People like Lady Severine do not write unless they mean to be taken seriously. Did she speak of anxieties?" "She spoke of noises in the house," Dr. Gray admitted. "Of drawers, not as she left them. Of a certain, how did she put it, encroachment of others' wishes upon mine. But old ladies have their suspicions. It is as lawful as tea. She was not one to be bullied." "Ah." "We shall call at Greywick House," Poirot announced when we stepped back into the salt air. "We have permission," he added, because of course he had obtained it while the rest of us were busy breathing. "To what end?" I asked. "To listen," he said, "to the furniture." The house was not in mourning. It was in attention. Mrs. Pym guided us with the stripped-down dignity of a ship's steward in heavy weather. The drawing-room had good brocade chairs, and a rug that asked you to mind your feet. The writing-table stood by the window that faced the pines. A little brass key on a ribbon hung from a nail above it. "Always there," Mrs. Pym said, because she had seen Poirot glance upward, as if the air were speaking to him. "And always returned," Poirot answered, because he could not resist finishing a sentence that had begun in his mind. We made the customary tour, bedrooms that had been kept in order even in sleep, a cabinet where medicines stood in a strict little rank, a shallow blue bowl where Lady Severine had placed, on her request, fresh rosemary for remembrance, said Mrs. Pym, not meaning to be poetic and therefore being so. On the landing was a long mirror, the glass slightly green with age, and opposite it a narrow table holding a small lamp, a travel clock, and a pair of spectacles folded as neatly as if someone meant to return to them any minute now. "The lamp is new," Mrs. Pym noted. "The old one went queer the week before. Mr. Adrian fetched this from the village." "Ah," said Poirot, "which is a syllable that means either everything or nothing, depending on the day." In Lady Severine's own room, the coverlet was crisply turned, and on the dressing-table lay a hairbrush, a pin-tray shaped like a shell, and a book of commonplaces with pressed flowers between its leaves. Poirot touched the latch of the window, then the little oval mirror with its silver back. "It is very pretty, this mirror," he said. "It flatters. One sees oneself and one's wishes. It is an imprudent friend." We returned to the Eider for dinner, and the tide, as if it had taken a vow to be helpful to the plot, came in with a stern punctuality, cutting the causeway, locking us all together in one neat box. "A closed space, Hastings," Poirot murmured, pleased. "It concentrates the little grey cells as a decanter concentrates the scent of the wine." Dinner tastes different when people are calculating their shares of grief and of legacy. Miss Teresa spoke of wardrobes and journeys she would take with a decisiveness that was almost moral. Mr. Adrian told a story about fog in Paris, and laughed at himself in a way he had clearly practised. Mrs. Beatrice offered little kindnesses the salt within reach. The dish turned towards one with a tender economy that made you trust her at once. Dr. Darnell was very gracious about tides and schedules. He had the professional manner that is both soothing and slightly condescending, like a warm bath made too hot. The Foxlow sisters watched the butter with fascination, as if it might reveal a rune in its surface if one had enough patience. "We should say what we saw," Miss Foxlow ventured at last, encouraged by the sherry. "My sister and I are not fanciful. We are very practical women," the other Foxlow added, though neither the tone nor the hair suggested practicality. But on the evening before Lady Severine fell unwell for the last time, we held a small sitting for encouragement. Not a full séance, mind you. We simply laid our fingers on the planchette and asked for comfort. Miss Teresa smiled with elegant ferocity. "And did comfort oblige?" "We saw a light," Miss Foxlow whispered, "a small pale light by her mouth." "From the lamp?" Teresa suggested. "The lamp was shaded," Miss Foxlow insisted. "We saw the pale breath of the other side. Or the reflection of the new lamp on the glass of that green old mirror," Dr. Gray suggested dryly, though kindly. "A phenomenon need not be a visitation." Poirot said nothing. He had that inward look that meant his mind was doing what it did best. After dinner, in the lounge, he began his little promenade of questions. Not the grand cross-examination of melodrama, but the small domestic queries that sound almost foolish until they begin to accumulate like pebbles in a pocket. To Miss Marsh, how long had she served? Had the routine altered of late? Did Lady Severine keep her medicine cabinet locked? Who dusted the cabinet? To Mr. Adrian, did he fetch the lamp? Had the old one flickered or merely smoked? Did he replace any other items? Did his aunt confide in him as the only gentleman of the family? To Miss Teresa, did she sleep soundly on the island? Did she find the stairs draughty? Had she ever borrowed her aunt's wrap when going down late to telephone from the hall, because that old instrument, like most old instruments, preferred to be temperamental at night? To Mrs. Beatrice, would the children come for the service? Did the little ones love the sea? Had she, as the practical niece, attended to her aunt's household accounts when asked? To Dr. Darnell. In his view, how strong was the old lady's heart? Had she taken any proprietary remedies? What was his opinion of digitalis? Why did certain doctors favour one dosage and others another? To the Foxlows, where had they sat? Who had lit the lamp? Had anyone approached the landing during their little sitting? "A figure," whispered one Foxlow, as if ashamed to produce such a cliché. "A person in a wrap gliding." "Ah," said Poirot. "And how did you know it was a lady?" "By the fringe upon the hem and a glimmering monogram, monsieur. 2 letters entwined. I saw it in the big mirror." "Which letters?" "L and M," said the braver sister triumphantly. "Lynette Marsh." Miss Marsh did not protest. She closed her eyes, as one does when a wind chooses to blow dust at them. "I never left my room," she said. "Not that night." "Yet the letters were seen," Miss Teresa insisted, with the kind of certainty that does not require fact. "Ladies," said Poirot politely, "a mirror is a friend that loves to contradict. Letters in a mirror do not keep their manners. L becomes something else. M likewise. But we will not quarrel with an alphabet. We will instead ask the house." Outside, the rain feathered the panes, and the downstairs clock took to the solemn work that clocks do when there is nothing better to do. We were locked in, by water and by custom. "You think there is something wrong here?" I ventured, when we were allowed the sanctuary of our room. "There is always something wrong where there was a letter," said Poirot, "and where there was a lamp. The old lamp failed, the new lamp came." The mirror opposite the landing recorded what was put before it. A monogram reversed is an introduction, not a testimony. And the little cabinet key always returned, "Ah, that is the politeness of the guilty." Mourning on an island is moral. It asks you what you meant to do and whether you will do it now. The solicitor, Mr. Purvis from Archer and Vale names, have a way of circling back to themselves, arrived on the first receding of the tide, with a bag whose leather had known dust, rain, seats hot from sun, and windows cold from mist. He conducted the reading with the dryness that such ceremonies require. The will was new, drawn up not long before Lady Severine died. The bulk of the estate was left to Miss Lynette Marsh, with a series of bequests, modest but not insulting, to the nieces and the nephew. There was also a certain sum set aside for the church roof. Lady Severine's contempt for wet hymnals had been well known. The room divided itself in silence. Silence can be very loud. Miss Marsh went white in a way that was not theatrical. Mr. Adrian's politeness frayed an inch. Miss Teresa's exquisite face did a calculation at speed and filed an appeal. Mrs. Beatrice's mouth, sweet and tired, closed on whatever charity she had meant to offer. The doctor looked at a spot on the carpet that did not need looking at. After, by an arrangement that could hardly be accidental, the company broke into pairs, trios, little knots, like fish deciding which way the tide ran. Poirot excused himself and went to speak with Mrs. Pym. I wandered into the church, where the rector was arranging flowers with the chastened industriousness that clergymen adopt in the presence of death and of women who judge arrangements. I looked at the roof. 2 planks were new, the rest bore the long history of storms. I am not a detective, but I like things that keep you dry. We reconvened after luncheon, which Mrs. Pym considered an obligation and others took as an affront. Poirot asked, very courteously, to be allowed another look through Lady Severine's rooms. There are men whose courtesy conceals their impatience. Poirot's courtesy conceals his aim. He touched again the cabinet. He examined the labels and the liquid levels. He asked about the arrangement, this on the right for morning, this on the left for night, this to be taken after meals, this to be avoided after brandy. She kept to the rule? She liked a rule, Mrs. Pym said. It was the world she didn't approve of. Is bitter. In the dressing-room lay a velvet wrap with a fringe at the hem, and upon its corner an entwined monogram. The letters were not L and M, as the Foxlows had believed, and as Teresa had so promptly repeated. They were M and L Marsh Lynette, yes, but in reverse when seen in the glass across the landing. Exactly so, Poirot murmured. A friend may be adored for telling you what you wish to hear, only the mirror tells you what you cannot help seeing. He folded the wrap with an almost filial care and replaced it. By late afternoon, the weather had made its decision in our favour and began to lift. Decisions of another kind, however, were sinking. Miss Teresa came upon us in the corridor with the firm look of a person resolved to be practical about the impractical. "Is there a way to contest?" she asked Poirot, as if he might be a short-cut. "There is always a way to quarrel," he said gently. "It is not always wise to go it. My aunt made me promises all my life, Teresa said, her voice very even. Today I have learned their value. Mademoiselle, said Poirot, there is a difference between a promise and an expectation. One is given, one is grown at home. I saw Mrs. Beatrice slip away and return with a shawl for Miss Marsh, who seemed cold even in a warm room. I did not know, Miss Marsh kept repeating, the words as rhythmical as the surf. I did not know. I would have refused. You say that now, Teresa observed softly. But gratitude is an appetite too. There was no charity in her smile. That evening, when the fire made a mild ceremony of the lounge, the Foxlow sisters asked for the lamp to be turned low. They are good women, silly in the manner of people who have never learned a more serious silliness. Poirot indulged them, perhaps because an experiment is never wasted on him. The new lamp, shaded, cast an oval of calm. The old green mirror breathed back a distorted copy. Observe, Poirot said. He drew with his nail upon the inside of the shade a tiny crescent notch, near invisible. When the wick rose, the notch made a pale spurt on the glass opposite, a little tongue of light that trembled near the height of a person's mouth. There is your breath of the other world, he said kindly to the sisters, a greeting from a very this-worldly knife. We had our phenomenon. We also had our pause. When we were alone, he said, there is always a hand behind the hauntings. Adrian? I asked, because he had fetched the lamp. It is a pleasant supposition, Poirot mused, and therefore suspect. He is the nephew. He is frequently in want. He is not, however, subtle. Teresa is swift. Swift is not the same as secretive. The foreign doctor? I asked, as one does, to get it over. You observe how we name the foreigner, and feel we have done the work of thought, Poirot said mildly. Let us not be lazy. Miss Marsh? I tried, wincing a little, for I am not made to suspect the dutiful. She has simplicity, he said. Simplicity sometimes kills without intention, but when it kills with intention, it is rarely caught, because nobody looks there. Keep that in mind for your memoirs, Hastings. This, with that not, continuity was not. Morning brought the solicitor again, and with him a small matter that is never small. The key to the medicine cabinet did not fit as obediently as before, as if the lock were sulking. It caught like that 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Pym reported. Her ladyship did not like it. She said old things should continue, or quit entirely. She was a philosopher, Poirot observed. He asked for hot water, a cloth, a quiet minute. He cleaned the key. He cleaned the keyhole. He examined the bottles again, lifting them to the light as if toasting the late lady's memory. Then he took from his pocket a small folded paper, and, with the air of a man who would prefer to be wrong, moistened a corner, touched it to the inside of one particular bottle's rim, and waited. You are pale, I said. I am annoyed, he corrected, at wickedness that borrows the manners of housekeeping. He called Dr. Gray, and the two of them spoke a language of dosage and tincture and infusions that left me admiring and useless. The conclusion had the simplicity of a sentence stood upright. Lady Severine's heart had been steadied by a small daily courage, and someone had, by a neat and patient anonymity, made that courage too strong. Not the panicky blow of poison, not the melodramatic dash of arsenic, but the quiet overkindness of an increased drop. It mimicked the heart's own failure so perfectly that a coroner would nod. Only a little vanity of wickedness had added the lamp and the mirror to furnish a story for the silly. We have a murderer, then, I said, with the dogged practicality of a man who would like the world to end the way the chapter does. We have a character, he replied. Murderers are persons, not functions. Who has the patience, the opportunity, the habit of keys, the tenderness for bottles? Who stands to gain not merely money, but a silence? And who, dear Hastings, understands that the most terrible thing is not always to be accused, but to be believed innocent without deserving it? The gathering was in the drawing-room at Greywick House. I have learned that Poirot prefers to draw his net where the fish were first disturbed. It gives them a better sense of inevitability. The pines fussed outside. The mirror waited without understanding. The lamp, innocent now, shone as if lamps could repent. Miss Marsh sat in a chair that was too large for her, and looked like a girl who had borrowed responsibility for a day and found it too heavy. The others disposed themselves with varying degrees of dignity and spite. Poirot began with courtesy. He acknowledged Lady Severine's rank in the household of human hearts. He admitted the island, the tide, the restraints of weather and of custom. He spoke of fear, and of small trespasses that make the large ones possible. Then he spoke of the lamp, and the notch in the shade, and the Foxlows sighed with the chastened pleasure of people proven foolish by an expert they admire. He spoke of the cabinet and the key. He spoke of the mirror and the letters that had behaved badly. He spoke of the change in dosage that is not a mistake when repeated. He spoke of motive, that polite word for hunger. Mr. Adrian began a defence before he was accused. "That is one of the ways you recognize innocence or folly." "I fetched the lamp," he said. "I thought only of light. I would not know how to notch a shade without cutting my thumb off, and you may inspect my thumbs if you like." "Thank you," Poirot said. "I will leave them their dignity." Miss Teresa's chin lifted as if preparing itself for a blow. "I despise tricks," she said. "If I wanted something, I should say so and fight for it, not tinker with lamps like a maid." "I do not doubt your candour," Poirot replied. Dr. Darnell smiled with a slightly frosty patience. "My dear sir, I am perfectly familiar with the effects of that particular medicine. I would have chosen a different instrument if murder were my trade." "Ah," said Poirot, "but would you have chosen a better alibi?" The doctor's eyes sharpened. "For one who is not guilty," he said, "an alibi is a coat not asked for." He turned last to Mrs. Beatrice Darnell. It is a cruelty of storytelling that the kindest face sometimes must be studied the longest. She had the air of a woman who has been good for too many people. "Madame," said Poirot, "forgive what must follow. There is a particular knowledge that mothers have, which spoon, which medicine, which sigh means danger, and which sigh means sleep. In a house ruled by routine, you would know the hour for the little glass and the dropper, yes?" She folded her hands more closely together. "I helped Aunt Severine, certainly. The old ways of service are not strange to me. Is no there?" "Nor to Miss Marsh," he said gently. "Yet there is a difference. Miss Marsh followed the rule. You, if I read the room correctly, made improvements. If by improvements you mean hot water for a chill or a cushion where a draught creeps, then yes," Beatrice said softly. "I did what any woman would do." He nodded. "Just so. You did what any woman would do for someone she loves, or for something she wishes to obtain. Madame, do you remember a night some weeks before the end, when you stood on that landing near the Green Mirror and wore a velvet wrap to go down and telephone? The Foxlows saw you. They saw your initials in the glass B and D, which looked like D and B reversed. One of them mistook the letters and made a little tale out of it. But the mirror does not lie. It merely contradicts. And below, the telephone looked out upon the hall table where the cabinet key hangs. It is a short walk from one hook to that little blue bowl with the rosemary, and then to the medicine cabinet. You took the key. You did what you had done before. You returned it, always, like a good niece. And the lamp? You nudged the shade with your nail to make an omen. You have neat nails, madame. A file would do the rest." Dr. Darnell made a movement of outrage. "My wife," he began, "is a better reader of hearts than of pharmacopoeia," Poirot said kindly. She knew enough to increase a drop, not enough to understand that the heart can mistake kindness for assault. She believed, perhaps, that she was easing her aunt into what must come. She believed, perhaps, that a change of will that gave the old lady peace would also give her children a future without having to beg for a husband's charity. His eyes were gentle, his words were not. "You see, madame, it is not only money that is motive, it is dignity. It is the domestic tyranny that requires one to ask before one buys the new shoes for a growing child. It is the humiliation of economies explained by a handsome man with a handsome smile." Beatrice closed her eyes. "It is not a confession to close one's eyes, but it is not a denial either." "You think me a monster," she said, very quietly. "I think you a person," Poirot answered. "It is worse and better." "I could not watch her be bullied," she said, and there was heat now. "Not by death, not by expectation. All my life I have watched the men choose what doctor, what school, what city, what hour, as if time were theirs by law. I did not increase the dose at first. I merely steadied it when Miss Marsh forgot, for she is good, but she is timid. Then I thought a softness at the end would be a kindness. She was tired, and I was tired of asking. I did not notch the lamp. I am not that theatrical." Poirot lifted the shade and showed her the little crescent. She stared at it as one stares at a drawing one did not know one had made. "I told Adrian," she whispered, with an odd little laugh that held no glee, "to fetch a new lamp because the old one smoked and the sisters were alarmed. I suppose I did say the shade wanted trimming, so this is justice pursued through housekeeping. Des. Have you have a Bing verse, right Eliver?" "Justice is a shy guest," Poirot said. "It arrives by the back door, wiping its feet." Teresa spoke then, crisp as crystal. "Beatrice," she said, "you might have told me." "Told you what?" Beatrice returned, with a sudden fierceness that made her beautiful. "That I would rather feed my children than your wardrobes? That I would rather ease an old woman than argue with a young one? You would have called it vulgar." "I would have called it criminal," Teresa said simply. "I had not intended," Poirot said softly, "to invite the law today." He glanced towards the window, where the pines had turned their backs to a wind on principle. "Lady Severine wrote to me because she feared scandal. The world calls scandal what it should call attention, but I promised to attend to her, to the truth, and to the decency that is owed the dead. Dr. Gray, you will certify for the Home Office what must be certified. Mr. Purvis, you will advise regarding the consequences of a will that the world might now call tainted, although the taint lies elsewhere. Miss Marsh." He turned to her. "You will decide whether to accept what was given to you, or whether to make of it a trust, a roof for a church, a home for children, something that will take the name of Lady Severine and make it useful. I do not advise. I merely observe that money behaves better when it is employed than when it is worshipped." Beatrice sat very still. "There are women who make drama by lifting their chin. She made it by not moving at all." "Will you ask them to be gentle?" she said at last. "For the children. They will hear things otherwise." "I will ask," said Poirot. "And I will insist where asking fails." "I did not mean it to be murder," she whispered. "Few people do," Poirot answered. "That is why so many of them commit it with such good manners." The tide had gone out when we left the house. The causeway was a ribbon of wet stone, the sea on each side, looking temporarily reasonable. Poirot walked with the satisfaction of a man who has put a picture straight on a wall nobody else noticed was crooked. "You do not exult?" I said. "It is not a sport," he said. "It is a geometry with tears." I considered that, and failed, as usual, to improve upon it. We stayed for the service. The church roof leaked only in one sentimental corner that everyone pretended not to notice. Miss Marsh read the lesson in a voice that made even the Begats sound dutiful and bright. Teresa wore black, that taught black, a lesson in style. Adrian put his hand to his throat now and then as if there might be a collar there one day, God forbid. Dr. Darnell managed sorrow with courtesy that did him credit, and that is something. The Foxlows cried into handkerchiefs embroidered with little stars. Dr. Gray stood like a lighthouse, unromantic and faithful. Beatrice did not look at anyone. Grief is not a spectator sport. Afterwards, there was the ordinary ugliness of official visits, and the extraordinary kindness of a village that knows how to bring casseroles when the world breaks. Decisions were made before supper that would have taken a city a month. Miss Marsh, after an hour alone in Lady Severine's chair, announced that Greywick House would be let to families who needed sea air and quiet for a season, and that the bulk of what had been left to her would go, in Lady Severine's name, to hold up the church roof, to endow nursing on the island, and to establish a little fund for the schooling of the island's children, which would operate on the simple basis that cleverness should not be penalized for poverty. Teresa remarked, with an acid that I almost admired, that Miss Marsh had discovered the pleasures of power. Then, perhaps because she recognized something decent when it slapped her, she put money of her own into the fund. Adrian promised to teach the boys to sail, and, to everyone's surprise, including his own, kept the promise for more than a summer. Dr. Darnell took his wife to the mainland without fuss. What happened there is not my business, except that I hope for mercy and I expect order. We drove away on the causeway with the sea, pretending indifference to our exit. "There is one thing I do not understand," I said, "because I like to tidy questions as one tidies drawers." "Only one?" he said, with that little smile that has never been unkind to me. "The letter," I said. "You said it had a voice. What did it say that the others did not?" "It said," he answered, "this: something is being moved when I am not looking." She did not say stolen. She did not say threatened. She said moved. She had felt that gentle, unforgivable adjustment that is the signature of a certain kind of murderer, the one who calls it kindness. "Well, Isik." "The notch in the shade," I said. "A kindness to the narrative," he agreed. "Every wickedness desires an audience, Hastings, even the tidy ones." He took from his pocket a small pressed sprig that he had lifted from the commonplace book in Lady Severine's room. "Foxglove," he said, "dried. She loved gardens. She did not love botany the way the wicked do." He replaced it with care, as if returning a bookmark to a chapter the reader would resume in another life. London received us without ceremony, as it always does. The city keeps no register of who returns wiser. Poirot set down his hat, straightened a picture that had offended him for weeks, and sat. "You are thinking," I ventured. "Always," he said, "but today, not sadly." He looked at the stack of new letters, at their assorted weights and postmarks. "There is much wickedness, Hastings, and there is also much housekeeping. I am condemned to attend both." "You choose to," I corrected, surprised at my own boldness. "Ah," he said, "you see, you are not only the audience, you are becoming the chorus." It was then, as I reached for the fire, that I noticed the smallest thing, a sliver nicked from the inner rim of our own lamp's shade, from some previous tenant's clumsy hand. For a foolish second, such is the mind when it has been walking with mysteries, I saw a pale dart on the glass of our bookcase, and felt a little jump of the heart. Poirot laughed, not unkindly, and turned the shade. The light obeyed him, as most things do. "You see," he said, "the world is full of explanations. It is our vanity that prefers apparitions." I might have left it there, but I am a soldier, and soldiers like a conclusion. "There is, however, one more oddity," I said. "Mrs. Pym claimed the letter had been delayed under the music cabinet. That is clumsy for a tidy household." "You have learned at last to ask the unsentimental question," he said, pleased. "Yes." The carrier did not drop it. The letter was tucked, carefully where it would be found later. It was a hedge. Lady Severine wrote it, someone hid it, someone else discovered it and posted it, when it suited them to have an explanation that did not involve the police arriving before the medicine obliged. Beatrice is tidy. Tidy people tidy their alibis as well. He lifted his cup. "To the tide," he said. "To the tide," I agreed, "because I have learned at last that everything comes in and everything goes out, and that the art of surviving is to cross the causeway at the honest hour, neither too early nor too late." "Very good. All of it, then. Deep as motive, wide as misdirection, high as a final turn, and a long echo after. I will not break the line. I will let it run, one breath into the next, as if the island never let us go, and the tide kept time for the voice." We did not go back to London that day. Poirot, who is never so decisive as when he appears to be idling, allowed the motor to cool and my expectations with it, and informed Mrs. Pym that we would trouble her for another night. "The sea is a very good gaoler," he said. "Let us use the prison to empty the cells." I am not sure whether he meant the house or the minds inhabiting it. It began with a knock on our door that was not a knock so much as an attempt to be a draught. Miss Lynette Marsh, apologizing to the air rather than to us, stood with that look common to people who have had a large thing pushed into their hands by fate and are trying to carry it with grace. "I beg pardon," she said, "but there is something I ought to say. It will not make me liked, but it may make me understood." Poirot seated her as if placing porcelain. He does even his kindness like a precise experiment. "I did not deserve what was left to me," she began, and her lips made bravery of a small tremble. "But I did not plan it either. Lady Severine was not easy, and she was never cruel, and that is rarer than kindness. When she changed her will, I was in the next room, counting the spoons for polish. I know that is a foolish sentence, but that is where I was. I have been accused in looks, and I prefer to be accused in words." "Mademoiselle," said Poirot softly, "the looks of others are the cheapest currency they possess. We do not trade with them. We trade with facts. You have brought me none. You have brought me truth. I thank you. I have also brought a small observation," she added, colouring as if one should apologize for noticing. In the week before the end, Miss Teresa wrapped the telephone cord around her finger when she spoke, very tightly, as if it were a ribbon on a parcel. I thought she might cut off her circulation, and I nearly told her so. Then I remembered I am not family. Teresa's finger, the cord, the habit. I saw Poirot put the detail on the shelf in his mind, where he places the small hard things that later become the hinge of the door. He bowed. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have done what is most useful in life. You have said the little exact thing." We went next to Mr. Adrian Vale, who sat in the lounge with a sailing almanac open before him like a repentant pupil. "I shall take the boys out when the weather steadies," he said, before a question had landed. "Mrs. Darnell's lads. They should not have only sorrow to remember of this island." "A very pretty impulse," Poirot remarked. "It has the look of a vow given to air. Let us bury it in the ground of fact. Tell me, monsieur, of your aunt's lamp." Adrian laughed, and the laugh had the shine of an old coin. "You have made a great novel of the thing. The truth is duller. The old lamp made us smell like kitchen disgraces. I carried it to the shed. I bought a new one from the village, because the Foxlows minded shadows as if they were snakes. If I had known it would figure as a character in a tragedy, I should at least have chosen a handsomer shade." "You cut nothing from it? You filed nothing on it?" "I would sooner file my own teeth," he said, showing them cheerfully. "I am clumsy with tools. I am deft with excuses. The two skills seldom travel together." Poirot's moustaches expressed an interest that did not quite amount to belief or disbelief. "And your aunt, did she confide to you that the will would be changed?" "She hinted that money is safest with those who think it heavy," Adrian said, and for once his lightness dropped away. "I thought she meant to frighten me. It turns out she meant to free herself." "From what?" He considered. "From petitioners. he said at last. "We were all petitioners. We simply gave different names to our petitions. I called mine Charm." We crossed the passage to the drawing-room, where the Foxlow sisters, having completed their morning's devotions to a deck of fortune cards of a kind more theatrical than theological, leaped up like stout rabbits, being polite. "We have been so reprimanded by sense," Miss Foxlow confessed, "that we have decided to embrace it for a whole day." "I congratulate you," said Poirot. "Let it be contagious." "We wish to report another phenomenon," the braver one said, eyes shining with the peculiar happiness of having more to offer than one was asked. "At the time of the little light, which is now explained by a shade and a man with a nail," her sister inserted dutifully. "At that time," the braver continued, "there was also a scent, not of gas, of polish, the kind you use on furniture." "You are very useful," Poirot nodded. "Furniture polish on a lamp glass gives to light a veil. It is a woman's trick. You have done well, Miss Dames. To attend is a virtue." We found Dr. Luca Darnell on the terrace behind the Ida, facing the sea with a stance that would have looked meditative if it had not also been defensive. "My wife has rested," he said, before we asked after her. "It is a doctor's habit to administer rather than answer. I have spoken with Dr. Gray. There will be the necessary questions. I do not complain." "It is most gracious of you not to complain of the world fulfilling its office," Poirot said evenly. "Monsieur le Docteur, your training would have told you that a little more of a certain remedy is a little death to the heart. Your love would have told you the same. Yet here we are." "You imply I am the one who poured," he answered, gentle, with a warning underneath. "I am not. I am guilty of something else. I am guilty of an optimism that becomes pride when contradicted. I believed I could manage my household with good humour and good science. Neither is offence. They are, at best, weather." "Do you think your wife capable?" Poirot asked, and he asked it with that odd kindness he has when he asks a cruel question. Darnell looked away. "I think my wife capable of endurance beyond what is fair," he said. "Endurance is a cousin to rashness. It goes too far when the road does not end soon enough." Miss Teresa we found on the church path, where she had arranged herself to be seen by the village with the exact degree of grief that suggested both control and sensibility. She greeted Poirot as one greets an accomplished tailor respectful of his art, suspicious of his bill. "I have been thinking," she said. "Always a dangerous enterprise for a woman, according to men who prefer the consequences of their own thoughts. Very minds spes." "And to what have you come?" Poirot inquired. "To this," she replied. "My aunt loved propriety more than people, but she fed people because it kept propriety fed. She would not have wished to be murdered by a vulgarity. If she was ushered out by a careful hand claiming to be mercy, that at least has style." "You defend," Poirot observed. "I observe class," she said, not smiling. "If the companion has done a pious theft, I shall be angry at the theft and bored by the piety. If my cousin has done a tragic arithmetic for her children, I shall be angry at the arithmetic and unable, perhaps, to despise her." "And you, mademoiselle?" Poirot said softly. "Would you ever set a thread across the top of a stair for money you had persuaded yourself you deserved by taste?" She stopped. It is a curious thing how stillness can be as revealing as speech. "No," she said at last. "I might cut a social throat. I have not the hand to cut a life." "Then you would borrow the thread," Poirot murmured. "You would not knot it." We returned to Greywick House and found Mrs. Pym in the pantry with an inventory as honest as prayer. "We have not asked you enough," Poirot said, with a humility as tidy as her shelves. "Tell me, madame, did any of the family show an interest in your stores that was not practical?" "Mr. Adrian liked the jam," she answered, forgiving him. "Miss Teresa asked for string for a parcel, and I gave her a length of the good brown. She never brought it back, but nobody does." Mrs. Darnell asked for rosemary for tea, for the nerves. I told her it is a superstition, but we have not much else on an island for the nerves, so I cut her some. Miss Marsh tidied the flower without being asked, and for that I would leave her my keys if I had a will. String, Poirot repeated, as if it were a word in a foreign tongue. And did anyone ever borrow any of the little tacks for the carpets, or the nail varnish that I see very neatly kept for touching the brass numbers on the doors? Miss Teresa had the varnish, Mrs. Pym said, thinking with the brisk patience of a woman who has thought of everything once already. She said the polish on the clasp of her bag was dull to the light. Ah, Poirot breathed. To the light. By afternoon the island conspired to make a play of our inquiry. A bank of weather sulked in from the horizon and sat heavy on the pines. The air grew metallic in that way that makes one feel a coin tossed in another's hand just out of sight. At such hours Poirot becomes musical. He hears patterns where others hear wind. He asked for us all to meet once more in the drawing-room at an hour that sits between tea and talk. He did not begin with accusation. He began with exactness. "We will agree on one thing," he said, "and then another, and then the rest. 1. The little light seen by the good ladies was a child made by human art, a smear of polish on the lamp-glass. We'll do it, as will a notch in the shade. I made a notch to show how such things are simple. It was a demonstration, not a relic. That is very important. 2. The key was replaced always, which is politeness. It is also cunning. 3. The dose was increased by so little that the heart believed it was its own mistake. This is the signature of a person who believes herself kind while doing what is not kind. 4. There was, before all this, an attempt to make of a staircase a weapon. That attempt was separate, and it failed. 5. Both attempts were born not of the same mind. Wickedness does not always need accomplices. It often has them by accident. The room shifted, like a deck giving under a wave. He turned to Teresa without looking at her. That is his oddest trick. It makes the gaze of everyone else become an instrument. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you borrowed string. Brown, of the pantry. You borrowed varnish. You dislike theatricals, and yet you will improve an appearance with a small, decisive act. On the night after you quarrelled with your aunt about money as you did, for Mrs. Pym hears when the serving doors breathe, you came out from your room, and standing at the head of the stair you sought to use the thread as a trip. You varnished the head of a small tack before you drove it, because you did not wish its little witness to shine. You tied to the banister where the knot would be sheltered by the curl of the wood. You did a clever thing badly." Teresa's mouth hardened into beauty again, as if it knew no other refuge. "If I had done this," she began. "I have a piece of varnished tack with a little brown lint on it," Poirot said mildly, and her eyes gave the smallest flicker towards the top stair, as if remembering where the world had once turned towards wickedness and away again. "You left it when you lost your nerve. It happens to the proud. Their hands learn judgment later than their heads do." "I did not push her," she said, and the pride flamed up honest for once. "If I tied the thread, if I cut it again before anyone stepped. I did not like the look of it, like a trap for a rabbit. I am not a poacher." "No," said Poirot, "but you are impatient. That is a dress that often tries to pass for another name." He did not give the room time to crown or stone her. He moved the weight with his voice the way a good porter moves trunks without fuss and each to its proper carriage. He turned to Beatrice. "Madame," he said, "yours is the second mind. It does not throw. It measures. You would not risk a fall. You would not endure the scandal. You would not have your children hear that their mother plotted with a string and a tack like a girl with a grudge. You chose a method that looked like care. You attended the drops. You kept the key. You replaced it. You adjusted, again and again, until the body accepted your decision as its own. Beatrice's hands were very quiet in her lap. "If I confess," she said, "will you choose a word for it that is not murder?" "No," Poirot said simply. "I will choose words as they are. To use them otherwise is a habit that makes more widows than knives do." There was a silence then of the heavy sort, and the rain came all at once, and committed to its part in the drama, and somewhere distant the sea made its decisions on rock. Dr. Darnell stood and sat again. A man can do both at once when he is being educated against his will. Mr. Adrian looked at the ceiling as if to negotiate with it. The Foxlows held hands like two girls surprised by lightning. Miss Marsh wept without noise. Even her tears were tidy. It was not yet the end. Poirot had kept one small chord unplayed. He took from his breast pocket an envelope that had been folded and unfolded enough times to earn respect from creases. "Before we are noble," he said, "we must be exact. Hastings thinks of honour. I think of paper." He extracted a single sheet. "This, mesdames et messieurs, was found this morning between the leaves of Lady Severine's commonplace book. It is in her hand. It bears no date. It bears a request. It is addressed not to the police, and not to any of you. It is addressed to me." He read, "If I should be made to appear to go of my own accord, it will be because something in my house has been moved when I am not looking. The key is always returned where it was hung. The mirror will show a thing reversed. I ask monsieur to consider that I wish no scandal, but I wish accuracy, and that the honour of my house is not in the mouths of my relations, but in the habit of truth." He folded the paper again. "She was a proud woman," he said. "She requested a surgeon, not a parade. I have given her the first." We might have ended there, with the honest cruelty of justice, and the compassionate untidiness of family arrangements to come, but the island is a miser with secrets, and spends them slowly. After the gathering had broken, and after I had done the awkward business of standing where I ought, saying nothing that required intelligence, I went to the hall to fetch a coat. The light was odd, that colour the day sometimes goes, when it is undecided whether to become evening. On impulse, I touched the little brass hook above the writing-table, the one that held the key on its ribbon, and it turned under my finger, with the slightest give, the give of something replaced not once but often with reverence. "You have it too," said a voice behind me, and I turned to find Mrs. Pym. "The habit," she added. "Some people return a thing and think they are saints for it. They have taken it first. That is what counts." "And who returned it most religiously?" I asked, in that amateur way of mine that makes barmaids and housekeepers tell me more than they intend. "Mrs. Darnell," she said, not unkind, "and Miss Marsh, one from love, one from duty. Who can tell the difference after so many years? It is the dose that proves the drug." There followed the slow, practical hours, the trip to the surgery, the quiet with Dr. Gray that is a blessing he does not advertise, the travel arrangements that the solicitor made as if always intended, the gentle instructions to the island constable, who looked like a fisherman interrupted by a uniform that did not quite fit. If you have not sat in a small room and watched a woman you believed incapable of wickedness tell the truth about herself in small sentences, do not envy the experience. It is a lesson that leaves a bruise on decency, but decency is a muscle and must be worked or it atrophies. In the late evening, when the island had been put to bed by the very ancient nurse that is salt air, Poirot and I walked the length of the causeway as far as prudence allowed, and back. "It will be whispered," I said. "It always is," he replied, "but whispering is not a verdict. The law will conduct itself. The family will conduct themselves. I will conduct my moustaches and my breakfast. Between these three, order returns." He glanced sideways. "You are troubled by the lamp, mon ami. You think I was careless to suggest the notch when I had made one." "I would never," I began, and he lifted a hand. "You would," he said, amused. "And you should. Attend me. The original little light was made most probably by polish on the glass. See how our good ladies smelled it. The notch I made so that eyes could see what I wished them to see, that illusions are cheap, and that anyone could have contrived one. It was a lesson, not an exhibit. When I drew the shade to Madame Darnel, I did not say it was the original. I said that such things are simple. She heard a different sentence because she had already spoken it to herself. The guilty write the captions to their own picture. We might have slept after that, but the island had kept one more stone to trip us and wished us to step on it. In the Morning Post there was a note addressed in a black, bold hand to Mr. Purvis, the solicitor, who, being practical, opened and read it in the hall and then brought it to Poirot as one might bring a live coal with tongs. It was from Teresa. It said, with a concision that I admired against my will, that she would make a statement regarding the matter of the stair. She would not have a crime laid whole at another's door when she had attempted a portion. She would bring the varnished tack, not because that proves anything, she wrote, but because honesty should have a prop in its hand when it walks into a room full of family. "You see?" Poirot said, and his satisfaction this time was not purely of craft. "The proud may not be good, they are rarely cowardly." The constable took down Teresa's statement with the patient gravity of a man who prefers boats to paragraphs. The law did not embrace her, nor did it bite her. It wrote a line. It made a file. It allowed the truth to stand next to the other truth without attempting to marry them. There are days when even the law has taste. We returned to London at last, by stages, as if the motor itself hesitated to exchange the clean cruelty of sea air for the clever cruelty of exhaust. I saw Poirot off at his flat as if he were a traveller of deeper distances than a few miles of streets. He set his hat on its shelf with more ceremony than most men give weddings. He adjusted a frame that had moved 1 degree while we were away. He sat. "It is not done," he said, regarding the letters. "It never is," I answered. "No," he said, "but there is a little thing that pleases me. Lady Severine feared scandal. She shall not have it. We shall give her what she asked, a geometry with tears, as I told you. The island will know enough to correct its talk. The city will know too little to bother. Meanwhile, the money will be put to work instead of worship." I confess to phenomena less noble. I slept then for the better part of a day, and woke up with an appetite suited to an army. During the week that followed, there were those small arrivals that mean events have gone into the ledger. A polite notice in a column that people read to see who is more or less important today than yesterday. A formal letter from Mr. Purvis to say that Miss Marsh had executed a deed of trust that caused the rector to cry, and 3 very poor families to put a pot on a fire they had thought cold. A brief, measured paragraph from Dr. Gray to say that he had received the laboratory's confirmations, and that they were what one expects when the heart has been persuaded by misapplied kindnesses. A note from Adrian on a postcard showing a boat making a foolish choice in a storm, saying that the boys had learned to tack and not to lie, and that he had learned to lie less and tack more. A parcel for Poirot from the Foxlows, containing a mystical deck they hoped would amuse him. He thanked them, of course, and placed it behind a dictionary, where it has since added a theatrical scent to the good words in that neighbourhood. Teresa sent no notes. She sent instead a cheque, which the trust accepted, and the rector announced with an astonishment he attempted to conceal. In a city shop months later I saw her. She nodded as one gentleman nods to another on a battlefield that has now become a meadow. We did not speak of Greywick. She had, I think, acquired a new kind of taste, the kind for limits. Dr. Darnel wrote from the country to say that they were closing their house in town for a season. In the sentence where he said, "we," there was no other name. I hope and do not need to know. As for Beatrice, the matter reached its dull and proper conclusion, which is the only conclusion for serious things. I will not set down details which are not mine to set down. There was a court, and there was a sentence. There was also testimony that was not designed to save her. She had not made of murder a project, and that counts. She had made of it a mercy, and that counts too, differently and severely. The judge spoke with that grave Anglican music that comes into the voice of men in wigs when they must explain to sorrow that sorrow is not a defence. Poirot, who could have been called, was not. He had sent instead the paper from Lady Severine and a letter to the Crown that used the word truth as often as some men use I. The Crown replied that it preferred facts, but it kept his letter on file, and I am not certain it did not read it. You ask me, perhaps, whether I am satisfied. I am a soldier. I like conclusions. But life supplies fewer of them than novels do. And yet there was one more, small as a sprig of rosemary and as aromatic. In the spring that followed, we returned to the coast for another case that did not involve islands or families or lamps, and having done the duty and the dinner, we took a detour to Greywick, because one should. The church roof was quiet in the rain. Children were in the porch rehearsing for some simple play in which shepherds never quite know their lines, and angels look like little girls who have been up too late. In the side aisle was a brass plate that said a plain thing about a plain gift, with Lady Severine's name and no more. Outside, on the path, I met Mrs. Pym, who has the air of a woman who will outlast us all out of tidiness alone. "You will wish to see the house," she said. "Not much has changed. That is the blessing and the trouble of islands." We went up the hill. The pines continued their principal objections to weather. The mirror on the landing remained slightly green. In it I saw myself older by a winter and no wiser by a book. The key still hung by its little brass hook, and Mrs. Pym had placed beneath it, not by chance, a shallow blue bowl with rosemary as before. "For remembrance," she said, and then, because she is a practical woman, she added, "and for the moths." Poirot took a single leaf from the sprig and broke it with an almost priestly care. "It is well, Hastings," he said, "when houses remember better than people do. A house does not add its little embroidery to a tragedy. It keeps the hook where it was. It keeps the mirror. It keeps the stair. And sometimes, if we are lucky, it keeps the truth in its small habits of where things go." He replaced the leaf. He straightened a picture that did not need straightening. He looked down the stair and up again, as if checking an equation. "There was one last thing I did not tell you," he said, and his voice went to that place where Poirot's voice goes when he loves knowledge more than victory. Lady Severine had been moving the key herself, some weeks before. She told Mrs. Pym to put it on the hook, always, and then she would take it and place it on the table and then back again. It was her experiment. She suspected that someone watched the hook more than they watched her face. She wished to see which person's eyes went to the empty place. Madame Darnell's eyes did. Miss Marsh's did not. The old lady wrote to me of this. It is how she decided to ask me for discretion and for geometry. "Then she misjudged her murderer?" I asked, for I am slow to nickname mercy when it kills. "She did not misjudge," he said gently. "She observed. And then she died, from a different observation. One can live many years on pride and caution. One can die in an evening from a kind lie, told too gently, too often, in drops." We left the house to its decent industry of keeping breathless things neat. The tide was in the mood for politeness. It stood back, permitting the causeway like a waiter drawing away a chair. I drove, because I like to pretend that I am in charge of our speed in the world. After a mile or so I said, "2 minds, then. 1 thread on a stair, and then a bottle on a table. The first shrank from itself. The second visited itself daily and called itself love. Do you know, I find the first forgivable and the second intolerable, and yet the law will be kinder to the second because it knows how to count." Poirot smiled without amusement. "The law must count," he said. "It cannot weigh souls. It weighs acts. I can weigh the little grey powder that falls from a conscience when it sands the edges of a deed to make it fit inside a good woman's self-regard. That is my métier. I am, as the English say, in the measuring line. There's a dear-zor." Back in London, where the shops shame the windows and the windows shame the street, we took tea, which is England's way of admitting that nothing answers anything except biscuits. Poirot read his letters. I watched him read his letters, which is a pastime in which I have found a curious peace. He paused, then. Over the third envelope, as he had done on the morning Greywick entered our calendar, he held it to the light, as if the paper might blush. "Another island?" I asked, half in a joke and half in a prayer that danger would keep its manners. "Not an island," he said, "and not a house. A hotel this time, a very modern hotel that is proud of its lifts. The modern things are often proud. They do not yet know how frequently they fail. Shall we go?" "But of course," he replied. "We have rested from the sea. We shall now rest from the land." He stood, adjusted the crease in his trousers with a tenderness some men reserve for infants, and took up his hat. "Hastings," he added, "bring the deck the good ladies sent us. It amuses me to cut a pack, and take from it not fortune but dust. It reminds one that what is shuffled does not become new. It becomes simply arranged." On our way out he turned the shade of our lamp, which had been set a fraction askew. The light corrected itself, and the room accepted the correction without gratitude, which is the mark of a well-bred room. "You see," he said lightly, "if one insists on apparitions, the world is full of them. But if one insists on truth, it will appear too, shy and exact, and it will always be smaller than the story that tried to hide it." I knew then that Greywick had not made him harder. It had made him even more himself. We went down the stairs, and London received us without ceremony, and the tide at Greywick, which keeps its own counsel, went out or came in. I could not tell which, very precisely on the hour.